It is 7 o'clock, which means you're watching The Only Breakfast Show, live from Westminster. Sky News has uncovered evidence of the strict controls that Uighur people are subject to in China, including half-military-style management. And as the deadline approaches for civil servants to declare any second jobs they hold outside government, it's been revealed that the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, was given shares in a firm that does business with the NHS. Also coming up this morning, rhubarb on the catwalk. We'll be chatting to the pensioner dubbed the Vegetable King, who's been made one of the new faces of the global fashion chain Gucci. That's coming your way at 8:45. Also ahead,
you are a warrior, fight until your last breath.
And at 9:45, we'll be talking to the Scottish singer-songwriter Callum Beattie, dedicating his new song to a teenager from his hometown who was given an unexpected cancer diagnosis. It is Friday, the 16th of April. Under control. Sky News uncovers evidence that Uighur people from Xinjiang are being advertised online to work under so-called half-military management.
是报到那个新疆政府那边的，他们肯定是先走高价的，那边是都会配这个入场，他们是半军错班的。
Deadline day, as civil servants are ordered to declare any outside jobs they hold. The Health Secretary is facing questions about shares he was given in a company working for the NHS. Final preparations are being made for the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. As it's announced, Princes William and Harry will not be standing side by side. Chicago shooting. Police release bodycam footage of an officer shooting dead a 13-year-old boy as he appears to raise his hands. Drawbridge daredevil. Police in Florida searching for a motorist who jumped their car across an open bridge. And in the sport, Arsenal and Manchester United both reached the Europa League semis to remain on course for an all-English final.
And so far this week it has been fine and settled, but will it continue that way into the weekend? I'll have the answer for you later in the programme.
Morning all. Sky News has uncovered new evidence showing the strict controls that Uighur workers are subjected to in China, including political examinations and half-military style management. Websites there are advertising workers in batches of 50 to 100, some with security guaranteed by the government. Beijing, well, has faced growing international pressure over the issues, but calls it the lie of the century. Our Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire has our first report.
These are Uyghur workers, featured on Chinese state media, celebrating the Islamic festival of Eid al-Adha. They are not in Xinjiang, their home, but thousands of miles away, in Shandong, East China. Rights groups allege that sending Uyghurs to factories around the country is indicative of forced labor, that they are subject to strict controls as part of a policy of assimilation. China rejects those claims. But Sky News has uncovered evidence of the tight social and political controls applied to Uyghur requests for comment. We phoned some of the numbers listed.
维族也就剩2000来个名额了吧，哈族因为就比较少嘛，就是报到那个新疆政府那边的，他们肯定是先走高价的，那边是都会配这个入场，他们是半军错班的。
Ultimately, the government decides where workers go, another agent told us. When they get that government approval, the workers end up in factories like the one in the video. We went to Shandong to find out more. When we arrived at the seafood processing factory, it was a very different scene. There are no Uyghurs here, the factory owner told us. They have all returned home because of the pandemic. He described the idea of forced labor as nonsense, saying workers came here because they chose to, earned at least £300 per month, and had air conditioners in their on-site dormitories. But they were under close supervision. The CCTV cameras in the office monitor those dormitories. Riot control gear is also at hand. And if workers wished to leave the factory to go shopping, the owner told us, the company would drive them in 2 buses. In the meantime, he had called the police. 12 officers and Communist Party officials questioned us for 2 hours before ordering us to leave town. Our questions were not welcome at another seafood factory in the same province. For years, it has run a UK subsidiary, registered in London. This manager was waiting at the door. He told us bluntly there were no Uyghur workers here, nor had there been in the several years he had been employed at the factory. That's contradicted by photos posted in March last year on the company's website, which have since been deleted. It shows Uyghur workers arriving from Xinjiang. The accompanying announcement says that their arrival will help poverty alleviation and the integration of the national family. This is a coastal export city some 2,000 miles away from landlocked Xinjiang. It comes with a very different way of life. Uyghur workers are being sent all across China to different cities. At the very least, it is a vast labour transfer program, and it's one that requires a whole industry around it. The Chinese government has been mounting an aggressive publicity campaign in reaction to the allegations of forced labour. We were invited to this press conference in Beijing earlier this year. Questions had to be pre-submitted in order to attend. We were told this Uyghur man had taken part in the labour transfer program.
If this labour isn't coerced, if it isn't forced, why do they need government supervision?
最近，境外有些人说我们去内地务工被强迫的，还受到了监视，这简直是胡说八道。我们祖国任何地方务工，去任何地方都是自己的自由。
Sky News asked the Chinese government for a response to our story, but after a week had received no reply. Even here in East China, so far away from Xinjiang, answers are hard to find.
Well, let's bring in Tom, joining us now, back in Beijing. Tom, good to see you this morning. I mean, the reporting is quite incredible. We have had plenty of evidence of the way in which the Uyghurs have been treated, but the level of control, the degree of complicity of the Chinese authorities in all of this is further revealed by your reporting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say the Chinese government has been on a journey when it comes to representing what's happening in Xinjiang. When the first reports of these mass internment camps came out in 2017, so quite a long time ago, for a long time China denied they even existed. Then after more and more evidence was uncovered, they said these were like boarding schools, vocational training centres. And then they said that everyone had graduated from the camps, and the focus became what happened to Uyghurs after they left these camps, whether it's in Xinjiang or outside China, as in that report, and allegations of forced labour. And China has changed its view. It's not just offensive, it's really gone on the offensive with this. Lots of documentaries being made by state media, attacks on those who say there is forced labour. It has got very, very aggressive in terms of denying what others are saying is happening in Xinjiang. And ultimately, that means it's doubling down on its strategy. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, has said its policies in Xinjiang are absolutely correct. Despite all the international pressure there is, there doesn't seem to be any possibility of a compromise. So every new piece of evidence that is uncovered is certainly useful, but in terms of changing what's happening, it's taking a very, very long time indeed for China to modify any of its strategies in Xinjiang or in the rest of the country.
Tom, many thanks. Former leader of the Conservatives, Ian Duncan-Smith, joins us on the programme. Of course, Ian Duncan-Smith, yourself sanctioned by the Chinese last month for comments that you have made about the Uyghurs. I'm just wondering your response to that which we saw from Tom. We have had plenty of evidence, of course, of the treatment that the Uyghurs have had. But Tom's reporting, I suppose, gives us just a little bit more detail of the level of interference, political interviews, military-style management that these people have to experience.
Yes, I mean, it's a very good report. He should be congratulated for having put that together. The truth is that the Chinese authorities are engaged in absolutely no question in my mind now, genocide. What they're trying to do is they're trying to eradicate an ethnic group which essentially is sort of somewhat Turkic in origin and not the same as the Han Chinese. And they don't want them because they're troublesome. So what's actually going on now is a number of different prongs of attack. He's absolutely right. There are workers, Uyghur workers now all over the country, thousands of miles away, in forced labor. But the Uyghur women particularly, they've been forced into sterilization. So you've seen in the later figures the population drop in the Uyghur population. It's a deliberate and systematic attempt to rid themselves of what they consider to be a troublesome Muslim group in one part of China. But this is not alone there, as he would certainly point out. This is going on in Tibet. There's over 500,000 now in forced labor camps. They've cracked down on Christians, had their churches smashed. Falun Gong have been arrested, organ harvesting against their will. And I gather now there's a crackdown taking place on the Inner Mongolians over their language. This is a very specific policy by the Chinese government, which is to basically make China based on one element of ethnicity, which is Han Chinese. And I think this is shocking. The world is beginning to complain about it, but I think the Western world, the free world, has got to do a lot more than that.
You yourself have just identified this as a genocide taking place. The governments, we know, of course, of the United States and Canada have already done so. There is a vote in Parliament next week. I mean, is it your view that it is now time for the Foreign Office to step up and label it such?
Well, the government refuses to say that this is genocide because they say that only a competent court can do so. But the problem we've got is the only competent courts that can call a genocide concerning a national purpose are actually either the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. Now, China's not a signatory to the Court of Justice, rather to the Criminal Court, and the Court of Justice gets blocked at the UN in the Security Council, of which they are a member, and their allies that they pay, the Belt and Road allies, the developing world, all line up with China because they receive huge sums of money from China. China is now very aggressively pushing its own concept of how to govern and how to run areas like Xinjiang around the world. It doesn't care what we think. It lashes out at people like myself who say so, and actually is busy now trying to redact all the information that we've been using. So the latest documents, I gather, about population don't have population numbers. A whole section's been taken out of them in Xinjiang province. So you can see what's going on. They're refusing to accept. But the West has been pretty weak on all of this from start to finish.
Yeah, just in terms, though, of the levers that we hold that might perhaps compel the Chinese to change their attitudes, to change their behaviour. I mean, if they don't care what we think, then many of the kind of the tools of soft diplomacy don't really appear to be at our disposal.
Well, we need to be a lot tougher on the trade issue. The one thing China absolutely needs is a very heavy amount of trade with the free world, mostly investments, really, huge investments. From countries in the free world, from the West, from America, from Britain, from places like Germany. They're very vulnerable to that trade issue. And what we should be saying to them now is we can't trade really in the same way that we do with a country that is such an abuser of human rights. We need now to start saying to the Chinese, you can't have everything you want, your cake, and eat it. In this particular case, until you stop this appalling behavior, which is ruled out at the UN, but which you are pursuing, then we now need to think about what we do about our trade. And we're already far too dependent on China for a whole range of things. The COVID outbreak showed just how ridiculously dependent we are on China. We've got to start bringing some of that manufacture and some of those elements of trade back with countries that we actually can rely on rather than with China. China is deliberately and determinedly, absolutely certain that they can get away with this because they know that the free world may bluster a bit about it, but won't do anything about it. It's time for action.
We are just about to run out of time, Serene, but I do want to kind of finish our discussion on a slightly different topic. A number of stories that have been around over the past few weeks about corruption in politics, about lobbying from former politicians. I don't need you to speak specifically to any of the stories that are around, but much as with the situation with China and the Uyghurs, there doesn't appear to be an easy solution to all of this. I mean, is there a way that we can have people who worked in politics, either in the civil service or in ministerial office, working in the private sector after that public sector employment without any questions ever being asked about it?
Well, to pick this point up. The truth is, this is about people who leave government, whether it be civil servants or politicians, and go out to do other jobs. It's quite clear you can't stop people leaving government to go and do other jobs. You couldn't stop somebody leaving one company and moving to another. There's always issues about the overlap in that. They are meant to delay their arrival at another company, and that, I think, needs to be better enforced. There needs to be a time break. But also, it's quite... For those who are in Parliament, those are in House of Commons, there are very strict rules, there are very strict reporting regulations and requirements. For those that leave, there needs to be a tighter concept of how they work with governments that they may have left or other governments. So everything has to be absolutely above board. There's nothing wrong in trying to promote, I don't think, some industry that may well benefit the UK, but it has to be done in a very open way. That means that this is done officially and decisions are taken in a proper process, so they can't be seen to have been influenced by a relationship with someone. All they can be seen to do is be influenced by the nature of the details and documentary evidence. So this has got to be tightened up for people on departure, whether they be civil servants. And there's absolutely no way that someone should be working both in a department as a civil servant and in a company outside. They can be seconded to companies, but they shouldn't be working in both. You can't have a foot in both camps.
Ian Duncan-Smith, good to see you this morning. Thanks very much for being with us.
Very good.
Still to come on the programme, at around about 7:30, we'll be speaking to the other side of the chamber. Labour's Jonathan Reynolds, the party saying that the government's Kickstart Jobs scheme is being rolled out too slowly. As the final preparations take place for Prince Philip's funeral in Windsor, we'll be speaking to the royal commentator Jenny Bond. That's at 7:45. And at 8:30, Owen Patterson will be on the programme to tell us about his new suicide prevention charity in memory of his wife Rose, who took her life last year. Well, let's return to that which we were just discussing, in fact, with Ian Duncan-Smith a moment ago. Today, the deadline for civil servants to declare any second jobs that they hold outside the government. And as that's been going on, it's been revealed at the Secretary. We'll be with you in a minute, Rob. You just stayed there. The Health Secretary was given shares in a firm doing business with the NHS. Rob Powell, of course, in the studio with us. Let's start, shall we? Greensill. How many inquiries are there currently ongoing into exactly what happened there?
I think we're up to about 7 now. Various lawyer-led inquiries, of course, committees of MPs conducting inquiries as well. And I think they've got plenty of material to get their teeth into. This morning, revelations in The Guardian about another individual with connections to the civil service and the Cabinet Office who was also working at Greensill. This is David Briarwood, who on his LinkedIn profile between 2014 and 2018 was a Crown representative in the Cabinet Office, basically a part-time executive responsible for getting value for money for the taxpayer. Also on that profile, though, between 2014 and 2021, he was a director at Greensill Capital. Now, the Cabinet Office say that he had nothing to do with procurement, he had nothing to do with supply chain finance, which Greensill did. So basically saying everything was done appropriately. But I think this does show just another link between this company and individuals working at the centre of government.
We keep hearing from the other side of the chamber, from the government, of course, but from all the parties on it, accusations of cronyism, those unlikely to go away today. Another story, this time involving the Health Secretary. Yeah,
Matt Hancock. This was reported by the Health Service Journal and the Guido Fawkes blog. Essentially, Matt Hancock's sister is a director of a company called Topwood Limited, which provides waste management solutions, storage, shredding, things like that. Now, Matt Hancock also has a 15% of shares in this company, which he was gifted earlier this year. Now, this company is an approved supplier for NHS trusts in England. Doesn't necessarily mean it does work, but it's basically on a list that means it can be used by NHS trusts. It's secure enough to do public sector work like that. It also has done a lot of business with the NHS in Wales, which of course isn't Matt Hancock's responsibility. Now, these shares have been declared in the MP Register of Interests. I think the slight issue might be that in the Ministerial Register of Interests, the connection through his sister to this company hasn't been declared. Now, that's what Labour is zeroing in on today and accusing him of cronyism. For his part, the Department of Health and Social Care says that Matt Hancock cleared this with the Permanent Secretary. They didn't think there was any conflict of interest. They say that he's not responsible for awarding any of these contracts. But I think in the current climate, it's no surprise that people think that the rules in this area perhaps need looking at again.
Rob, for now, thanks very much indeed. Now, it will be a service infused with all the traditions of the monarchy, but one that will also observe coronavirus restrictions. Buckingham Palace has released details of Prince Philip's ceremonial funeral tomorrow, which will, of course, be attended by only 30 of his closest relatives instead of the 800 guests originally planned to attend. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills has the detail.
Arriving to support his mother, the Prince of Wales was driven into the grounds at Windsor Castle as the military carried out their final preparations ahead of his father's funeral tomorrow.
The irony of COVID is that the Duke of Edinburgh, who never liked all the panoply and state, wanted no dramas about his dying. And this is the event that perhaps he would have most required. It is measured, it is tidy, it is disciplined, and it's the best salute the armed forces could give.
30 people will make up the congregation, with the Duke's children and grandchildren represented in the procession to the chapel, led by the Prince of Wales and Princess Anne. The Queen will be accompanied by a lady-in-waiting as she is driven behind the coffin. Family members will be socially distanced, will wear face masks, and the congregation won't sing. With a seating plan not due to be released until Saturday, it is anticipated the Queen may sit alone. And members of the family will not wear military uniform. And that's to try and keep the attention away from those who've recently stepped away from royal duties and keep the focus onto the legacy of Prince Philip. Inevitably, though, there is going to be interest in Prince William and Prince Harry brought together again to mourn their grandfather's loss, walking in the same line in the procession behind his coffin, but separated by their cousin Peter Phillips. It's hoped that touches like this will be a reminder of the man they'll be remembering. This unique mode of transport chosen by the Duke to carry his coffin, a Land Rover that he helped design. Mike Gretton worked alongside Prince Philip as the chief executive of the Duke of Edinburgh Award and saw for himself the family man that he could be.
We were in Buckingham Palace and the magic hour arrived for the meeting to start, and he wanted to get on with it, but one member wasn't there, and that was his son, Prince Edward. He was quite grumpy and said, well, let's get on with it. But 2 minutes later, the door opened and in walked Prince Edward. And the first thing the Duke of Edinburgh did was leap to his feet and kiss him on both cheeks. Now, I was caught out by that. It was lovely to see and not what I expected. It just showed his love for his family and his humanity.
On Saturday, it will become clear just how much Prince Philip was involved in the planning, from the music to military ceremony, making his mark until the very end. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Windsor Castle.
And just a reminder that full coverage of Prince Philip's funeral will be taking place here on Sky News. We'll have a special programme starting tomorrow at 12:30, and then there will be additional live coverage on Sky One from 20 to 3. Police in Chicago have released video from the body cam of an officer who shot and killed a 13-year-old boy.
Please stop! Stop right now! Hey, show me your hands! Stop it!
Adam Toledo raises his hands and is then shot. The officers then administer first aid. An independent board is now investigating the shooting. Immediately after the incident, the police claimed Adam had a gun in his hand. But his family's lawyer says the body cam footage disproves that allegation. Well, to the trial of the man accused of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It began nearly 3 weeks ago. Derek Chauvin has now addressed the court for the first time, but only to invoke the Fifth Amendment, the right not to answer questions and incriminate himself. His legal team have now rested their case as the trial nears its end in a city still tense after that other fatal shooting. Sky's Sally Lockwood reports now from Minneapolis.
After nearly 3 weeks of evidence, we've heard in court for the first time from former officer Derek Chauvin.
Is this your decision not to testify? It is, Your Honor.
All right. Do you have any questions about your right to remain silent or to testify on your own behalf?
Not at this time, I don't.
All right. Has anyone promised anything or threatened you in any way to keep you from testifying?
No promises or threats, Your Honor.
Do you feel that your decision not to testify is a voluntary one on your behalf?
Yes, it is.
As expected, Derek Chauvin chose not to testify in his trial for the murder and manslaughter of George Floyd. The defence has now rested its case, arguing George Floyd died of several factors, including drugs and a heart condition. With a final rebuttal, the prosecution recalled a witness to speak to Derek Chauvin's knee on George Floyd's neck, what they argue was the cause of death.
As soon as you put pressure here, you can immediately sense that your upper airway is narrowing.
The trial is now playing out in the backdrop of protests sparked by the death of another black man by police. 20-year-old Dante Wright killed in a routine traffic stop by Officer Kim Potter, who claims she fired her handgun instead of her taser by accident. George Floyd's family lawyer is now representing the Wright family too.
Unbelievable that the police woman killed another unarmed black man while the Derek Chauvin trial regarding the killing of George Floyd is going on. I cannot believe it. If ever there was a time in America where they should be de-escalating, it's now.
The outrage over these two deaths by police have converged in Minneapolis. The courthouse and much of the city now locked down and boarded up.
There was already a heavy security presence here for the trial, but that has visibly stepped up since the shooting of Dante Wright on Sunday and the nightly protests that have followed since. There's a real concern here that things could only escalate by the time of verdict.
The outcome of one of the most important criminal trials in US history now hinges on 12 jurors, who we expect to begin deliberations next week. Sally Lockwood, Sky News, Minneapolis.
Also this morning, police in Florida are trying to identify the driver of a vehicle caught on camera jumping over Drawbridge. The footage shows the car smashing through a traffic barrier before jumping the bridge over the Halifax River in Daytona Beach. Let's just see that one more time. OK, it's not the biggest jump I've ever seen, but I would certainly not recommend it. Time to see how the weather is looking this morning. Naz is standing by at the wall with all the details. Morning, Naz. You've never done anything like that, have you?
No, I couldn't believe it. Literally, my jaws dropped open. I mean, that's wow. Dedication to get to work, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it's looking fine out there for today once again. Will it stay fine for the rest of the week? Let's have a look.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. High pressure keeping things fine and settled once again across the vast majority of the UK and Ireland for today and actually for the rest of the week. Most places continue dry with some good spells of sunshine, but nights are chilly. In fact, generally speaking, it's quite cool for the time of year. And so far this April, temperatures have actually been a few degrees below the average as a daytime high. So this morning it's chilly, frosty for most places, but it's mainly dry. A bit of mist and fog across eastern parts of England. That should soon disappear. Then we continue with sunny spells into this afternoon. A little bit of fair weather cloud bubbling up, so the best of the sunshine over northern and western areas where it will feel fairly warm with the light winds too, except across the far northwest of Ireland and Northern Ireland. Cloudier, breezier there with a little light rain across northwest Scotland possible later.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thank you. Still to come on Breakfast, we'll be speaking to the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, as Labour criticises the government's Kickstart Jobs programme. That's next. Welcome back. Sky News has uncovered new evidence showing the strict controls Uighur workers are subjected to in China, including the need for political examinations and half-military style management. The former Conservative leader, St Ian Duncan-Smith, believes that China's treatment of the Uyghurs amounts to genocide. Earlier, he told the programme the UK needs to take a tougher stand on the alleged abuses by limiting trade with China.
Well, we need to be a lot tougher on the trade issue. The one thing China absolutely needs is a very heavy amount of trade with the free world, mostly investments, really, huge investments from countries in the free world, from the West, from America, from Britain, from places like Germany. They're very vulnerable to that trade issue. And what we should be saying to them now is we can't trade really in the same way that we do with a country that is such an abuser of human rights.
New research suggests that young people who catch coronavirus aren't fully protected against getting the infection again. Sky's Becky Cottrell has been taking a closer look at. Morning, Becky. Just tell us, how concerned should people be about this?
Well, the results from this study are interesting because they suggest that participants who caught COVID-19 were susceptible to becoming reinfected within a relatively short period of time. The study looked at more than 3,000 US Marine recruits. Those are people about to start their training as a Marine. The participants were predominantly men aged between 18 and 20 years old, and they were tested across a 6-week period before their training began. And of the 189 participants that tested positive for COVID-19 earlier on in the study, 19 of them, that's 10%, caught COVID-19 again during those 6 weeks. Now, while this is a relatively small study, the researchers say the results are interesting because they show that a small but significant proportion of the participants were susceptible to becoming infected again. They also looked at antibody levels, and as you might expect, those people that were infected again had lower antibody levels than those that weren't. They also had fewer neutralizing antibodies. Those are antibodies that literally neutralize an infectious particle when it enters the body. Now, obviously, as we open up and start mixing again, there are concerns about the effect that could have on infection numbers. And government and scientists want to find out more about the protection offered by antibodies, both from natural infection and from the vaccines, and how sort of long-lasting and powerful those antibodies might be. And this study was interesting because it looked at young people. And obviously, young people are not yet vaccinated, but are going out and mixing, so concerns about the fact that they might be susceptible to reinfection before they've been jabbed.
Becky, many thanks indeed. As we head into the weekend, let's get a roundup of all this day's sporting action. Jackie is standing by. Morning, Jackie. Good to see you.
Good morning, Neil. You too. Yes, got some really good Arsenal goals for you. A brilliant Dan Evans win in the tennis and also Paintgate.
This sports bulletin is brought to you by Vitality, committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
I'm Errol McKellar, and I've been a football youth coach and mentor for over 40 years. We're at the training ground for the Leyton Orient youth team. I've been very privileged to work with some really, really fantastic footballers, the likes of Sol Campbell, Ashley Cole, Ledley King. But when they're passionate and they're good at what they're doing, your job is not that difficult. All you've got to do is keep enhancing and working with their dreams. If we don't make them become footballers, we make them become better people.
Trust these guys, they will get you.
Thank you, guys. I wasn't always a football coach. I started off as a mechanic. That was my day-to-day job. You know, everything was fine until I was diagnosed with prostate cancer. I found out about prostate cancer purely by accident. When my wife Sharon was complaining about me snoring, I went to the doctor. I picked up a leaflet from Prostate Cancer UK, and the young lady said, "You don't need to make an appointment. This is a simple blood test that takes less than 10 minutes. I get a phone call. Could I come in and have a biopsy done? Moving on from that, I had a scan. And the doctor said, "Mr. McKellar, your prostate is covered in cancer. If we don't remove your prostate, you could be dead in 6 months. And I remember sitting in my car, I just burst into tears because I didn't know what to do next. And my wife came in the car and she said, look, in all the years that I've been with you, I've never seen you quit on anything that you've ever done. She said, this cancer has only knocked you down. It hasn't knocked you out. And I took that as an inspiration. So I had the operation to remove the prostate. I had to have nearly 3 months of radiotherapy to get rid of the rest of the cancer. The first day I went back into my garage, a gentleman came in to have some work done on his car. And I said, when was the last time you had your prostate checked? And he said, what the bleep, bleep, bleep? I said, I've got a two, my gearbox not working. And I said to him, listen, I'll give you a 20% discount on the work I'm going to do on your car if you go and get your prostate checked. 2 weeks later, he came back. He had a 25% cancer in his prostate. He said to me, look, don't worry about the money. More importantly, I think you need to start raising the awareness of this issue, right? Because I wouldn't have gone and done this check had you not said it. And he was the first of 48 guys that walked into my garage, no different to this, that was diagnosed with prostate cancer. 1 in 8 men suffer prostate cancer.
Committed to getting 100 million people 20% more active by 2025.
Jackie, thanks very much, I think. Let's take a look at a couple of the other stories kicking around this morning. To the United States first. The country has announced sanctions against Russia following a major cyber attack. Moscow has denied the allegation that Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service was responsible for the so-called SolarWinds cyber attack last year.
Today, I've approved several steps, including expulsion of several Russian officials as a consequence of their actions. I've also signed an executive order authorizing new measures, including sanctions to address specific harmful actions that Russia has taken against U.S. interests. I was clear with President Putin that we could have gone further, but I chose not to do so. I chose to be proportionate. The United States is not looking to kick off a cycle of escalation and conflict with Russia. We want a stable, predictable relationship. If Russia continues to interfere with our democracy, I'm prepared to take further actions to respond.
Still to come on Sky News Breakfast, we're going to be joined by the royal commentator Jenny Bond as the final preparations take place for Prince Philip's funeral.
It was a really slowly but surely process. I started to see my schools coming back, and at the same time, I think I realised that actually lockdown and the pandemic was going to last a lot longer than I originally thought. So I thought, we're going to be at home a lot longer. I'm going to be spending more time on the row machine. Could this be an opportunity? Could this be a way to make it work? And rather letting it work against me, actually it worked for me because I could manage all my family time around training. And so, yeah, it's kind of worked that way. Well, a lot of it's done at nap time. So as soon as they go down for a nap, I'm straight on the row machine. And generally weights, if I'm doing weights at home, the kids join in, or I'm reading stories between sets, and it looks entirely different to the setup that I had pre-London and pre-Rio. But I always think if I'm the best mum I can be first, that allows me to be the best rower I can be. And I think definitely taking that onto the water, when I do get to go and train on the water as well, I think that I just managed to kind of compartmentalize the parts of my life. Well, I wake up with the kids first, and I actually have a couple of hours with them in the morning through the early hours, and that's really, really nice. And then I get to leave the house a little bit later than I used to. So a lot of my training schedule is just done around them. It's done around them and their schedule. And I'm really grateful that Polly, my rowing partner, has just been totally flexible about letting that happen. Yeah, definitely. I think that mums can be so supportive of each other, and that's just incredible. The first person, or one of the first people that I phoned when I was thinking about coming back, was Anna Watkins. She won gold in London and attempted to come back after having children. And although she didn't quite make the Olympic team, she's the one that, has all the advice for me. And if I don't make the team, I want to be the person that someone can call and, offer advice to them. And I think that supporting each other is one of the best things we can do. Yeah, if the Olympics hadn't been delayed, I would be watching from my sofa. There's no possible way I would have even considered making a comeback in that time scale. So it's totally changed everything for me this year. I just wanted to make sure that this year I came out the end of it having achieved something, having done something that I never thought possible. I mean, I genuinely, hand on heart, don't really think about the gold at the moment, because I'm thinking about selection. I'm thinking about making it there. This time last year, I was not even a rower, let alone thinking about the Olympics. So that's a little bit beyond my thinking at the moment.
Does anyone know which particular parts of your body can be damaged by air pollution?
Most places will be fine today with sunny spells once early murky conditions clear. The best of the sunshine will be across northern and western areas. It'll be mainly dry too, except across the far northwest of both Scotland and Ireland, where it'll be windy with some patchy light rain possible. So taking a look at the air pollution levels on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being very high, most places will remain at a low level of 1 to 3 again today, thanks to the mostly fine and settled conditions.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Welcome back. Labour has criticised the government's rollout of its Kickstart job scheme, claiming it is too slow. As analysis from the party shows that it may not be fully rolled out until, get this, 2043. Joining us now, the Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds. Mr Reynolds, good to see you this morning. Just explain exactly what your research has revealed. 2043, it does seem like that might be just a little bit too long for any government scheme to get rolled out.
Well, the Kickstart scheme's target is 250,000 work placements being created. And so far, by the end of March, 6,000 have been created. So if that rate of rollout continued, I'm afraid it would be 22 years until the scheme delivers what the government have asked. Now, the serious point we're trying to make on this is that if you look at who has lost their job over the last year, 600,000 people who've lost their job since February last year, who are under 35. So 88% of the unemployment that's been caused in the pandemic has been hit on those younger workers specifically. And I know because of the furlough scheme, which everyone supported and everybody wanted continued, unemployment has been mitigated overall. But we shouldn't forget there is still a problem there. These people need support because the people who are most affected by periods of unemployment are, of course, younger workers who can be scarred by that for many years to come.
I mean, we should say, of course, this is a government scheme very much in its infancy. No one expects the progress to slow even further. The expectation is that it will get quicker. But I suppose what you're in essence arguing is we're just not doing enough to support young people right now.
Well, absolutely. And the focus has to be on right now. One of the things that we've asked for is that time spent on furlough is considered in terms of the impact on younger people as well as the time spent unemployed. Because a person could be on furlough, they could be economically inactive with all of the downsides we know that creates similar to unemployment, obviously better than being unemployed. But then with a period of unemployment after that, the impact in terms of being out of the labour market, being out of active work for so long is very, very significant. So we think the government has to do more. And frankly, the focus has to be on delivering it as soon as possible. Not next financial year, not the end of this year. Sure. Let's get some action now.
But as it stands, I mean, the scheme itself, Kickstart, you seem quite in favour of it. It's quite a good idea, positive.
We certainly believe there should be interventions. Now, we would actually like the overall level of ambition to be much greater than it is at present. So we would like for any young person under the age of 24 who's been out of work or on furlough for over 6 months to be guaranteed a place like this or an apprenticeship or full-time education, because frankly, even if the overall number of jobs was hit under Kickstart, even if it did actually hit full capacity, that might not be enough, because that's because of the scale of the impact and how it has hit younger workers. And we've got to be aware of that. So what we've got at the minute is a scheme which isn't perhaps not ambitious enough, but even that level of ambition is not being delivered.
Can we talk about a couple of issues that seem perpetually to arise in politics? Accusations of both cronyism and corruption. And this morning, the Labour Party is making some pretty significant accusations about the conduct of the Health Secretary.
Well, I think if you look at what we've seen over the last week, I mean, we're talking here about, you know, in my brief, 1980s levels of unemployment. It feels like we're back to 1990s levels of Tory sleaze. And the crucial issue here is transparency. And there is not enough of it. There should be. It doesn't matter whether it's a former Prime Minister like David Cameron telling us he hasn't broken any rules because he knows the rules don't cover him as an in-house lobbyist. We've got the senior civil servants having to write to other senior civil servants asking if they're double jobbing for private companies they're also in charge of awarding contracts to you. And now this issue with the Health Secretary, where a very straightforward personal connection, which would be and should be declared in the usual way, hasn't been. And I think people are sick of it, to be honest.
I just wonder how sick of it you actually think the people are. I mean, can you envisage circumstances in which, you know, government contracts should not be awarded to companies in which ministers or civil servants have a financial interest? That would be a start, wouldn't it?
Well, I think the crucial thing is got to be transparency. A blanket
it doesn't matter
like
if they're doing it just as long as we know that they're doing it.
Well, because that could cover something from a very large contract to something relatively minor. So we'd have to be aware of that. In cases where someone stands to financially gain considerably themselves from a decision they may be making, I think that's inappropriate. I mean, I think no one should be in a position where they can make a decision which will be to their own personal benefit. I think that would be completely wrong. So I think you've got to have transparency, but with some, as you say, some rules about exactly the extent of that.
We mentioned civil servants having, you know, double jobbing, as you put it. I mean, there are plenty of people who would like civil servants to be doing one job and one job alone. But I suppose the very same could be said about, you know, many MPs who seek employment outside of the Palace of Westminster.
Well, I think being an MP is a job, and it's a difficult job, and it's an important job, and it should be your main focus. I think there are minor issues around people who write books or maybe have a newspaper column. I don't think that's what the public are worried about. When I see, especially when I was a Shadow Treasury Minister, and you'd be in those debates in the budget, you're in a Finance Act, and people would get up, and all they have to say is, I refer the House to my register of interest, and I would look each one of those people up, usually on the Conservative side, I've got to say. You know, to see people not just earning a bit extra, but earning six-figure sums on top of their parliamentary salary.
Do you think MPs should have second
I don't think you should have an interest as large as that. If you're earning, you know, £200,000, £300,000 on top of being a Member of Parliament, I think that's, you know, dedicating the time that being a Member of Parliament requires. And as I said, I know there are particular issues around journalism and authorship of books and things like that, academic journals. No one is perhaps as concerned about that. But this should be your main job. But there's no doubt about that.
Jonathan Reynolds, great to have you in the programme. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. Now, final preparations will be taking place today ahead of the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh. Just 30 people wearing face coverings will attend the service due to coronavirus restrictions. The funeral procession beginning just after 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and of course live here on Sky News. And these are beautiful pictures that we have taken in Windsor this morning. Looks like it might be similar conditions tomorrow. Let's bring in the royal commentator. Many of you will be very, very well aware of her. Jenny Bond joining us on the programme this morning. Jenny, pleasure to have you on this morning. You will have seen the details that the Palace has released about the funeral, and of course things clearly were going to be very, very different because of coronavirus. But what do you make of the way in which they have orchestrated a huge event for the family, of course, of the Prince, but of course for the nation as well?
Well, I think in the end, because the COVID restrictions have made it so much smaller than was planned, there would have been about 800 guests there. In the end, you know, I think it is the kind of funeral that the Duke would have wanted. And I think it's going to be that much easier for the Queen because she's not going to have to meet and greet in the way you can in COVID times. 800 people. This is going to be a family funeral. And the guest list makes it clear that it's a funeral about the Duke. It's not about anyone else but the Duke, which is why 3 members of the German side of his family have been invited. The only representative of the Mountbatten family is Penny Romsey, Penny Natchbull as she is, the Countess of Mountbatten as she is, and she was his great mate. She was his driving carriage companion. And I think the Queen has really made it focus totally on the love of her life, whom she's lost, and for the Queen, it will be the saddest day, clearly, of her life.
As you say, the Countess, perhaps not one of the one of the names with less public brand recognition than some of the others. Are there any names that that perhaps were not on the list? Of course, we have representatives, of course, from the Duke's family and German connections, of course.
Yes, well, the German connections was a great surprise, actually. But apparently this was one of the Duke's wishes. We all talk about the solitary background he had, and it was a very difficult, rootless childhood, but he loved his sisters. He had these older sisters, 4 of whom married into the German aristocracy. And though he was separated from them by geography, he did love them and they loved him. And it was one of his wishes, apparently, that at his funeral, that German side of his family should be represented. So that was a surprise. And it must have been a very quick decision because they've been over here quarantining since the weekend.
Jenny, some are perhaps making much out of the fact that Princes William and Harry will not be standing shoulder to shoulder at any point during the funeral. What do you make of that? Is that something that people are right to pick up on?
I think it's sad. I think it is a lost opportunity. I mean, you know, they all know that by not walking side by side, whatever the significance of that truly is, they must all know that it was going to draw speculation, that the rift between them is very, very far from mended. So my question to them is, why not walk side by side? And again, you have to feel sorry for the Queen managing the sensibilities and sensitivities of her family, not only over whether the boys should walk side by side, about who should wear uniform, because it seems that the Duke of York wanted to wear an admiral's uniform, to which he's not entitled. And Harry would be embarrassed by not being able to wear a military uniform. She's had to think of all these things when, honestly, the poor lady, nearly 95, having just been widowed, should not have to think about these things, in my opinion.
Jenny Bond, good to have you on the programme this morning and, of course, to tap into your expertise. Thanks very much for being with us. Time for us to check in and see how the weather is looking today. Naz is standing by with the details.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Good morning. It's looking fine and settled once again across the vast majority of the UK and Ireland. We continue with high pressure keeping the weather fine, but it is actually quite cool for the time of year. And so far this April, average maximum temperatures have been slightly below average and nights have been very chilly as well. In fact, no exception for this morning. A chilly start out this morning with a fairly widespread frost. Some patches of mist and fog across eastern areas, freezing fog in the northeast, a bit cloudy and breezy and less cold across the far northwest. Otherwise, lots of sunshine, sunny spells carrying through into this afternoon, maybe a bit cloudy across central, southern and eastern areas, and the northwest of Scotland cloudy and breezy with a little bit of rain later.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Naz, thanks very much indeed. Stay where you are. Coming up in the next hour here. Being subjected to strictly controlled work programmes which could amount to forced labour.
For the early risers.
We examine the story beyond the headline.
For the knowledge seekers.
Welcome to Divided States.
For the straight talkers. The curious and the ones who want to be entertained.
Backstage, Sky News' entertainment podcast.
For wherever you are.
Welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday podcast.
For the ones who want to know more.
Welcome to the All Out Politics podcast.
For the listeners.
From Sky News Storycast.
Sky News Podcasts. Listen and subscribe for free.